He paid for her vacation while deployed. She spent it sleeping with another man and called him the problem. She told him the other man was her cousin. Let that sink in for a second. After a year of lies, after all the evidence she left scattered around like she wanted to get caught, after months of yelling at him and calling him crazy for trusting his own gut, that was her answer. He was her cousin. And this man, this deployed soldier who had given this woman a decade of his life, 2 children, a marriage, and his complete and unconditional trust, had to stand there and accept that explanation or be called the problem all over again. This story broke something in me the moment I read it, and I need you to understand exactly why. He had been with this woman for 10 years. Married for nearly 6. They had built an entire life together, the kind of life that takes real work, real sacrifice, real love on both sides. Or so he thought. While he was away serving his country, literally deployed and unable to come home, she took a solo vacation that he paid for. He paid for it. And while she was on that trip, she slept with another man. And then she came home. She unpacked her bags, kissed her kids, looked her husband in the eye, and decided she was going to keep that secret for over a year. Think about that sequence of events. She came through the front door, set her luggage down, held her children, looked at the man she had married, and in that exact moment made a conscious choice. Not a passive one. An active, deliberate, fully conscious decision to carry this into the future and say nothing. Let me walk you through what that actually looks like in practice, because it is important that we do not gloss over this. She was not just hiding a one-time mistake. She was actively managing a lie every single day. Every morning she woke up and chose to deceive him. Every conversation they had about their future, every family dinner, every bedtime routine with the kids, every moment of closeness between them, she was performing it all while sitting on this secret. Picture what that bedtime routine looked like. The kids asking for one more story. Her tucking them in. Him standing in the doorway watching his family and feeling grateful, feeling like the luckiest man in the world, while she stood right beside him holding something that would have destroyed all of it if he had only known. That is not a moment of weakness. That is a sustained, deliberate, calculated choice made over and over again for more than 12 months. And then he came home from deployment. You would think that the guilt would set in at that point. You would think that having her husband physically present in the house, seeing how much he loved her, seeing how hard he was trying to hold their family together, would make the weight of what she had done unbearable. Imagine what those first few days back looked like. Him walking through the door, exhausted and relieved, probably holding his kids a little longer than usual, looking around the house he had been dreaming about for months. He had been counting down the days. He had probably replayed that reunion in his head 100 times while he was away. And she stood there receiving all of that love, all of that relief, all of that warmth, knowing what she had done. Instead of coming clean, instead of seeking counseling or showing any remorse at all, she became abusive. That is the word he used. Abusive. She started treating him worse, not better. As if punishing him could somehow outrun the truth that was already closing in. Every time he got close to figuring it out, every time his instincts told him something was wrong and he tried to gently raise it, she would explode. She would yell at him. She would tell him his lack of trust was the problem. She would flip the entire situation around until he was the one apologizing for being suspicious of his own wife. Think about how disorienting that must have felt. He would bring something forward, something he had noticed, something that did not add up, and instead of getting an answer he would get a wall of noise and emotion designed to make him feel small for even asking. He would walk away from those conversations not with clarity but with shame, carrying the weight of a guilt that was never his to hold in the first place. Over and over again she sent him back to himself as the problem, and over again he believed her, because he had no reason not to. That is textbook gaslighting, and it is one of the most psychologically damaging things one person can do to another, because it does not just hurt you in the moment. It makes you stop trusting your own perception of reality. It makes you feel like you are losing your mind. He was a man who had been trained to operate under pressure, to trust his instincts in life or death situations, and she managed to make him doubt himself in his own home. I just want to pause here for a second because I genuinely cannot wrap my head around the level of cruelty it takes to do that to someone who loves you. He said he always thought she was a better person than him. Read that back. This man, who served his country, who was paying for vacations he was not even on, who was staying strong for his children, who chose the path of high trust because he believed in her, genuinely believed she was the better one in the relationship. He had internalized a version of himself that she had quietly shaped over time, one where he was the flawed one, the suspicious one, the one who needed to do better. Every time she redirected his legitimate concerns back onto him as character flaws, she was reinforcing that image. She was teaching him that his instincts were the enemy and that his love for her required him to silence them. And he listened, because that is what devoted people do. They trust the person they chose. They assume the best. They take the criticism seriously because they genuinely want to be better for someone they love. She knew exactly what she was doing with that, and she did it anyway. That tells you everything about who he is and everything about how thoroughly she had shaped his self-image to serve her deception. The evidence had been there for a year. He said so himself. Physical evidence. Behavioral evidence. Things that in any other context would have been impossible to explain away. But he loved her. He trusted her. And she used that love and that trust as a weapon against him, knowing that his commitment to the marriage was the very thing that would keep him from seeing the truth clearly. Every time he came close, every time his gut screamed at him to look harder, his love for her told him to give her the benefit of the doubt. And she knew that. She was counting on it. She had mapped out exactly how far she could push him before he broke, and she stayed just inside that line, knowing that his loyalty would do the rest of the work for her. She was not just cheating on him. She was exploiting the best parts of who he was to protect herself from consequences. When the truth finally came out, when there was no more space left for her to gaslight and deflect, she did not break down and beg for forgiveness. She did not admit what she had done and ask for a chance to make it right. She did not look at their 10 years together and their 2 children and decide that their family was worth fighting for. She chose to blow it all up instead. She threatened to take the kids. She turned a betrayal into a war. And now this man, who was already shattered, who was already trying to process the worst pain of his life, has to fight a custody battle on top of everything else. He has to sit across from lawyers and mediators and explain the collapse of his marriage while simultaneously trying to hold himself together for the sake of 2 children who had no part in any of this and deserved to have their father present and whole. There is something particularly brutal about the kids being pulled into this, and I want to sit with that for a moment. Because he is not just grieving the loss of his marriage. He is grieving the loss of the life he thought he had, the partner he thought he knew, the family unit that he had been sacrificing everything to protect and provide for. Every deployment, every missed birthday, every holiday spent far from home, he endured all of it because he believed he was building something worth coming back to. He told himself the sacrifice had a purpose. He told himself that every hard day away was an investment in the people waiting for him. And now he has to look back at every single one of those moments and reckon with the fact that while he was making them, she was not holding the same thing sacred that he was. That realization does not arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, touching every memory, every photograph, every moment that once felt like proof of something real. And now every single day he has to wake up and fight to maintain access to the 2 most important people in his life, while also somehow processing the emotional devastation of what she did. That is an almost unbearable amount of weight to carry. He said he does not know how he will ever trust another relationship again. And I think that is one of the most honest and heartbreaking things a person can say after going through something like this. Because the damage that infidelity does to your ability to trust is not just about the person who hurt you. It rewrites the way you read people. It makes you question your own judgment. It makes every future connection feel dangerous because you thought you knew her better than anyone, and you were wrong. and now how are you supposed to know when you're wrong again? Every new person he meets, every woman who shows him kindness, every moment where he starts to feel something genuine, he is going to have that voice in the back of his head asking whether he is being fooled again. That is what she took from him. Not just the marriage. Not just the family. She took his ability to feel safe in love. But here is where I need to land, and I want to be clear about this. He did nothing wrong. Not a single thing. He trusted his wife because that is what you do in a marriage. He chose to believe in her because love requires that kind of vulnerability. He stayed strong through deployment, through the gaslighting, through the abuse, and through the revelation, because that is the kind of man he is. The fact that she used all of that against him says everything about her and absolutely nothing about him. She did not just cheat. She built an elaborate architecture of lies and psychological manipulation designed to keep herself safe at the expense of his sanity. She let him believe he was the problem. She let him apologize for being suspicious of something that was absolutely real. She robbed him of the chance to make an informed decision about his own life and his own marriage for over a year. And when the walls finally came down, she chose war over accountability. He is going to get through this. It will not be fast and it will not be easy, but the clarity he has right now, the ability to name what happened and call it what it is the beginning of something. The man who believed in her completely is also the man who will believe in himself completely once he has had enough time and distance. He deserves that. His children deserve a father like him. And whoever she was pretending to be for those 10 years was never worth the man he actually is. She made out with a stranger 2 feet away from him on his birthday, then he found the texts. On his birthday. She did it on his birthday. Not at some random low point in the relationship, not during some messy argument where things spiraled out of control, but on the night they were out together celebrating him. She had been all over him at the concert. Singing with him, dancing with him, leaning into him the way you do when you want someone to feel like the only person in the room. She made him feel loved and chosen and happy, the kind of happy that is rare and specific and that you hold on to because life does not always hand it to you freely. And then 2 hours later she was making out with a stranger 2 feet away from his face. 2 feet. I need you to picture that distance because it is nothing. That is the length of your arm. She was not even trying to hide it. This story unfolds in real time across a series of updates, and each one hits harder than the last, so I want to take you through it exactly the way it happened. Because the emotional roller coaster this man went on in the span of a single weekend is something I think a lot of people will feel deeply. The night started as something genuinely good. He was not drinking that evening, choosing to stay sober and drive everyone home safely, which is already a small but telling detail about who he is as a person. Think about what that choice actually represents. He gave up the freedom to let loose on his own birthday because he cared more about the people around him getting home safely than he did about his own enjoyment of the night. He was there to support her enjoyment of the evening, to be present and attentive, to celebrate with the people he loved. They were at a bar after the concert when she ran into someone she knew, a friend of her brother, and he did the considerate thing. He stepped back. He gave her space to catch up with this person without hovering over her, without making her feel watched or monitored or controlled. He trusted her enough to walk away and have his own conversation elsewhere in the room. He was being a good partner. He was giving her room to breathe. And that is when his friend tapped him on the shoulder. When he turned around, she was kissing this man. Right there in the bar. In the same room as him, with the music still going and the lights still low and people all around them just living their normal Friday nights, completely unaware that this man's entire world was cracking open in real time. Close enough that if he had taken a few steps in any direction he would have been standing right beside them. She did not look around first to check if he was watching. She did not excuse herself and find a quiet corner somewhere. She just did it, out in the open, while her boyfriend of 8 years was a few feet away celebrating his birthday. He left. Which is honestly the most composed response a person could have in that moment, because the instinct to just walk out rather than explode in public takes a serious amount of self-control. There is something almost unbearably dignified about it, a man absorbing the worst thing he has ever seen and choosing silence and movement over chaos. He was already heading home when his friend told him that the other guy had also left, and that is when something in him shifted. Despite everything he had just seen, despite the way his chest must have been caving in on itself, despite the nausea and the disbelief and the specific kind of grief that comes from betrayal by someone you completely trusted, he turned the car around. He went back to make sure she got home safe. Even in the middle of being destroyed by her, he was still thinking about her safety. That detail should not be rushed past. That is who this man is, down to his core, even when he had every reason to leave her to figure it out herself. He let her have it when they got home, and I think anyone reading this would completely understand that. He said it was not his best moment, but I actually want to push back on that framing a little. Having a visceral emotional reaction when you have just been publicly humiliated on your birthday by the woman you have spent 8 years building a life with is not a failure of character. That is a human being responding to genuine pain. The fact that he acknowledged it and reflected on it afterward actually shows more emotional maturity than most people would manage in that situation. Then the next morning he made a decision that changed everything. He went through her phone. And what he found was not a drunken mistake that had gotten out of hand. It was multiple text chains with multiple men. Sexting. Photos. A pattern of behavior that had clearly been happening for some time, not a single night of bad choices fueled by alcohol but an ongoing secret life she had been maintaining right beside him, in the same apartment, in the same bed, in the same daily routines that he thought they were building together. He described himself as being on the verge of a panic attack when he woke her up, and I believe every word of that. Because there is a specific kind of devastation that comes not from realizing the person you love made a terrible mistake but from realizing that the version of them you loved may not have been fully real. It is not just heartbreak. It is the disorientation of suddenly not being able to trust your own memory of the last however many years. She had an explanation ready. She told him she had been feeling insecure and that instead of coming to him she found an outlet with other men online. And look, I am not going to pretend that is not a real human experience, feeling insecure in a relationship and not knowing how to express it. But let me be very clear about what that explanation actually means. She felt something uncomfortable, and instead of having a hard conversation with the person she supposedly loved and lived with and had built 8 years of her life alongside, she chose to build a secret life. She chose to deceive him. She decided her discomfort was more important than his trust and his dignity. That is not a communication problem. That is a character problem. He was typing through tears when he wrote that update. On his birthday weekend. In his apartment. Alone. His 2 best friends came over, and I think that detail matters more than it might seem at first glance. Because in that kind of moment, when your entire understanding of your relationship has just collapsed and the silence in your own home feels like it has weight and texture, the people who show up without being asked are the ones who remind you that you are not actually alone even when it feels like the floor has dropped out from under you. They did not wait for him to reach the point of asking. They just came. He also mentioned that her mother reached out to him, which says something meaningful about how the people closest to her understood the gravity of what she had done. Then came the final update, and honestly it is one of the most quietly powerful things I have read in a while. He made his decision. He started packing her things in garbage bags. Not folding them carefully, not leaving her a note about how much she had meant to him, just the clean and practical and final act of bagging up what belonged to her and making the separation real and physical. He did not spiral into bargaining or convince himself that love was enough of a reason to stay. He had processed what he needed to process, and he made the call. He said he was going to drive to her mother's house after work to make it clear and final, not because he owed her a conversation but because he is the kind of person who needed to close that door with his own hands. 8 years. Living together for 2 of them. Financial entanglement, shared space, shared routines, shared everything. The kind of life where your names are on the same things and your schedules are built around each other, and you stopped thinking of the apartment as yours and started thinking of it as ours without even noticing it happen. And he still chose himself. That takes a kind of courage that I do not think gets talked about enough, because walking away from something that long and that deeply embedded in your life is terrifying, even when walking away is clearly the right thing to do. The comfort of what you know, even when what you know has hurt you, can make the exit feel impossible. He walked out anyway. Here's what I want to say about this whole situation, and I am going to be direct. She made a series of deliberate choices, and every single one of them was a betrayal of someone who trusted her completely. The concert kiss was not an accident, it was a consequence of who she had already been behind his back for some time. The drunk excuse might explain the lack of inhibition in that moment, but it does not explain the text chains, it does not explain the photos, it does not explain the months of hiding it. Alcohol lowers your defenses. It does not create desires and behaviors from nothing. What came out that night was already there. And he deserved none of it. Not the humiliation, not the discovery, not the panic attack in his own apartment on his birthday weekend, not the impossible logistical nightmare of figuring out how to separate his life from hers when they share a home he cannot afford alone. None of it was his fault, and none of it was a reflection of his worth. The fact that he immediately started thinking practically about how to move forward, that he reached out for support, that he let his friends in, that he was honest about his own reactions, including the ones he was not proud of, all of that tells you that he is going to be okay. Not today, and maybe not for a while, but eventually. He closed his update by saying he loved and appreciated every person who had supported him through that weekend. On his birthday. After all of that. Still leading with love. That is not someone who is going to be broken by this forever. That is someone who is going to heal, and when he does, he is going to be extraordinary for the right person. Drop a comment below telling me which story hit you harder, because I genuinely cannot decide. And if this kind of content speaks to you, a like and a subscribe means more than you know.